Hello and welcome to Military Mantra. In this interview, we have today Jeff Depatie, who is from the Canadian Special Forces and who is also a sniper. And in this interview, we'll try to understand his journey in the armed forces and various life lessons that he has learned over his service. So, welcome, Jeff, on the interview, and thank you for taking out the time for the session.
Yeah, no problem, Akash. A lot of gratitude. Thank you for, carving out the time as well. We had a little bit of back and forth, but we were finally able to make it work.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So, Jeff, if you could, start telling us how was your journey before joining the military, and what was your motivation to join the military back then?
So, if I was to rewind and look, boil it down to that question, my life, like everyone's, is a series of events that always had a thread of the military feel to it,
Okay.
As a young guy, those were the games I played. Those were the cartoons I watched. I don't know if it was my environment pressuring me, G.I. Joe, getting me ready for the military, or myself, just a natural born warrior with warrior essence, working towards that journey. But yeah, like I said, there was always a common thread. And then at a certain point, I was ready to do this. I was a little bit older. I was probably about 20-ish. I had thought about it, went to post-secondary, thought about it some more. And as life can do, it presented a lot of, not roadblocks, but like, oh, hey, now you got to take care of your parents' business. Oh, hey, now you got to do this. There's always a lot of reasons to not move forward with something, but I'd be lying or exaggerating if I said it wasn't a calling within me. There was a certain part of me that had this warrior energy, like I said, that I wanted to use for what I perceived as good in the world, right? Bringing balance to the scales of good and evil, if you will, justice, injustice, however you want to look at it, fair, unfair, free, not free. And then the issue was, so I was a Canadian,
Okay.
and I was married to an American woman, and Canada wasn't really doing much. So this was kind of, 2000. We were still kind of in the peacekeeping realm. And to be honest with you, that didn't really, tickle my fancy. That I wasn't drawn to that model. I was still young and youthful, and I didn't fully understand it, but I also didn't want to pursue it. So I started signing up in the American military.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2011 happened, and the US government stopped taking foreign nationals into their military for a while. So, that forced me to pivot, readjust, take a look again at the Canadian military, which I did. And finally, someone started talking to me in the recruitment about their special forces. I had no idea of what they really were. I kind of knew in the background, and that's, I think SF at its best is people not knowing what's going on. The issue is then how do people ever find it really, especially in a small military like Canada, where unlike say like the US that has like 1 million people to choose from, we're a small military, very small comparatively. So yada that happened. I forced to readjust, and then I pulled the trigger, as it were, and finally got recruited. And then that started, well, it's a long journey in a lot of ways, right? Going through recruitment and into basic training, this whole new world of like ironing my bed sheets and doing little tedious, mundane things that just really suck. There's no, the reward is very, they call it delayed gratification, right? The gratification is far away from the moment. And with basic training, it's very far, because after basic training, it's just that basic training, right? Then you got to go to your trades training, and then you're in your trades training. And, it's not all down, and that's not to paint it as the worst thing ever. In a lot of ways, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It whooped me into, it truly helped develop things, some might call it your prefrontal cortex or whatever, but discipline, the ability to delay those gratifications. I wasn't super good at that before. So it did give me that. From basic in Canada, I went to what's called soldier qualification, which is for our army. It's a blanket course. To be honest, I don't know if they still do it, but everyone in the army takes it. It makes you not like it starts to separate the Army from Air Force, Navy.
Okay.
Okay. And gives you a little bit more hands-on with soldiering. It's just that
Mm,
soldier qualification makes everyone a more prepared soldier
mm,
generally. And then from there, that's I don't know, maybe 8 weeks or so of kind of slogging it out, rockets and that kind of stuff. It has its, if you're into shooting, if you're into blowing stuff up, it's good stuff. And then I went into what we call DP1, which
okay.
is your infantry qualification here in Canada. And that was grueling. That was, I thought I was a hardened human being up until that point. I considered myself pretty adventurous.
Mm,
I was into skydiving and rock climbing. Really, I grew up on the edge of civilization here in Canada in
mm,
a lot of ways, and I was outdoorsy. I was used to the cold, minus 40 Celsius kind of,
okay.
and here in DP1, it's a whole new kind of hard. You're at the whim of someone else, and it's grueling in a lot of ways. You don't get to dictate the mission. You're out stuck in a snow trench, shivering all night, kind of, again, with no real like, hey, this is the hope other than becoming a soldier, which is always the drawing force, right? I want to move through these things to become a soldier, and in my case,
Mm,
eventually an SF soldier. But yeah, it taught me a lot about discipline. It taught me a lot about perseverance and hardship, which are truly learned traits. You don't just, everyone's born with a certain, matrix of traits, but you can
yes.
develop them more. Like someone's perseverance might be here, and then through the years you can develop it here. Someone's courage can be here and you can develop it, right?
Correct.
So you have to take these stepping stones. They help you prepare for the next steps.
Mm,
So that's why I mentioned them in the journey, because without each one of those,
mm,
there is no Jeff, the retired tier 1 sniper. So after that, I went into basically what we call our jump company, our airborne unit.
okay.
It's very small in Canada. There's 1 per 3 regiments in the 3rd Battalion. So just to like clarify, we have 3 major regiments for the infantry:
Okay.
the Royal Canadian Regiment, the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, and the Vendus, which is the French unit. The
Okay.
Vendus, the 22s. Anyhow, each one has an airborne company within it. And that's where I went, and I got my airborne in-dock course, which again, that next level of grueling, jumping into snow and, packing toboggans and stuff like that, hundreds of pounds on your back all the time, freezing cold, and, loving every minute of it though. It's like, okay, I signed up to go through hardship, and hardship I went through, right? While developing skills of a warrior, of a soldier, more specifically.
Mm,
Maybe I don't want to just paint the picture that a warrior is just a soldier.
mm,
Um, anyhow, I did a deployment to Afghanistan, a 9-month tour to Afghanistan. And then when I got back, I pretty much started training for selection. And now, fast forward just through all the years that it was there, I was in the regular Army. I think it was about 4 years or something like that. And then, yeah, I went to selection, got through selection for Joint Task Force 2, which is Canada's tier 1 unit.
okay.
And then I joined JTF 2, and that kind of brought me to my special forces career.
Got it. Jeff, if you could also speak about, at what age or in your timelines of life did you decide to join the military? Also, were you always that adventurous and, such an outdoor kind of guy or an athlete that you decided you want to be in special forces? If you could, describe that aspect.
Yeah, it's interesting, Kosh. As soon as you said that, I was like, yeah, pretty much always. But then I remember there was a time when I was just a little guy,
Huh.
We'll call it 4 or 5. I was super shy, super shy. I was very clingy to my parents, and I wasn't very adventurous,
Okay.
So fortunately for me, my parents helped develop. My parents were very good at creating wide boundaries. They gave me wide arcs to live within, and they kind of pushed me to those in a lot of ways. just by the nature of how they brought me up. And that helped me develop that keen sense of adventure that was there. And then pretty much through my adolescence, yes, I was always riding on the edge of everything I did. It got me in a lot of trouble in some ways, but did a lot of good in some ways. I guess, that classic saying, I was pretty fortunate to get out alive. But that eventually, honing that, served me very well once I got into the special forces.
Got it. So Jeff, if you could tell us, how does the Canadian population look at the military? Do a lot of people join there? So how is, life right there?
Yeah, I would say, in Canada, there tends to be this, and maybe in India it's similar, but I don't think so, because you guys have such, you guys got tons of political parties, right? That are in where in Canada we have, maybe 4 or 5, maybe 6, we'll call it, but really 2 or 3 is what we got. A little bit more than the US, but way less than India. And what happens is, when a very liberal government comes into power, they really don't push any army agenda or any military agenda, right? They stifle it, they cut budgets, they do a whole bunch of things. And I'm not left or right. I'm not, it's not about painting that picture. Where on the right side, our conservative government, you'll see military ads start to happen and recruitment goes up, and they tend to join in the conflicts around the world a little bit more. So anyways, all that to say, in the last little while, it doesn't take long to change how people feel about something in general, right? Politically, it happens very quickly. The last, I don't even know what we're going on, maybe 7 years or so, we've been in a liberal government. And I don't even know it's 7 years. I don't really follow the news or politics anymore. All that to say that changes how the military is viewed. I would say, as far as the government invests, money per soldier, we're very well funded. I think we're the second highest paid military in the world. We have really good benefits while you're in the military, so there's a lot of support that way, and this is all paid for by the taxpayer, right? So that's why I'm saying, in a lot of ways, we have a ton of support. And then our veterans programs are pretty good. They're not great, but all that's all support from the people, right? That's people paying taxes, so that's part of the support. I would say, just conversationally, Akash, I think Canada 20 years ago was the head. I'm going to say this, and they might have some eye rolls, but was ahead of the curve in some ways. We started moving into peacekeeping. We were really trying to move away from highly kinetic war, if you will. Trying to move towards more peaceful resolutions. I'll use peaceful in quotes, because who really knows what the agenda, how that looked. But that's how it was kind of sloganed. And in some ways, Canada is very liberal. Some people might even call it socialist in some ways, which I don't fully agree with, but it's pretty left in some ways. Now, there is a ton of people who support the military in a lot of good ways. Like I said, taxes. There's people who have, a lot of military exposure, and they support the military really well. I would say the military, like the soldiers, men and women in uniform, are respected. I would say that they're well cared for, but I don't think there's a huge appetite in Canada to be carrying out the act of war anymore. That's just my hunch. I don't really watch the news anymore. I don't keep my finger on the pulse anymore. I don't keep updates from kind of that old world. It's a little too, I'll just say, stressful for me. That I did my time, right? I did my 10 plus years, or whatever it was, 14 years as a soldier. I did my time. And then when I moved out of that, I need time to detune, right? So I don't really follow it. So I'm not like fingers on the pulse, but that's what I would say. I would say we're somewhere in there. It's like, financially we're taken care of, logistically we're taken care of, equipment wise we're great. We're part of NATO, we're part of the Five Eyes. We're in the group, right? We're part of the the war fighting countries that are out there. And I don't just say war fighting as if it's just like going to impose war. I don't want it to sound like that either, because I know it's not that cut and dry, and it's really not that. There's bad people out there, and unfortunately, right now, we don't have maybe enough support from the whole world. And I mean we, as in you, as in me, as in someone from anywhere, to really truly bring out the tools that will change the world, change the paradigm of why we fight war, right? The whole concept of, I like to say, hurt people, right? So think about, if you are hurt, if you have unresolved traumas, if you haven't sorted out your coping mechanisms, you're probably going to hurt other people, right? Now, these people move into positions of power and they make those same kinds of decisions, right? And there's a little bit more pressures, right? Because they got pressures from, groups of economic lobbyists or people, there's a lot of people pushing for their agendas. And as long as that happens, we're going to have turmoil will probably always be there. It's just a shame that we have to, it's good that we have men and women who are willing to fight it. It's just a shame sometimes that we have to, like, I was thinking about this interview, and I was thinking about a few stories of things that happened where, it's truly, unless someone's leaving out some details, it can be difficult to paint the glorious side of battle. Because there's very seldom true honor in battle nowadays. Honor can happen when, two ideals clash deeply. And I don't just mean, I mean well thought out, organized ideals from people's. And sometimes they do come out at ends and odds. But unfortunately, swift violence, or I guess fortunately, it's making its disappearance in the world slowly, I think. I'm not sure. It's been a while since I really traveled around and felt it out. I know right now we got this battle in the Ukraine.
Yes.
That is a testament otherwise. And kind of, if you really look at the last, oh man, I want to say 100 years, and then I say 2,000 years, and I'm like, maybe it was always like that. Like, people have been at odds a lot, right? Like, why do we have 2 world wars in the last 100 years? Like, what is that? Why can't we, resolve this a little bit better? Where we don't have to go to that. Because those men and women, they're going to sacrifice something. They're going to leave something on the battlefield from their soul. And that is, like I was saying to you earlier about, I don't want to glorify, but I don't want to vilify the military. I just would want someone making that decision that there is a very good chance you're going to leave something on the battlefield. Just hopefully your country's agenda, yours or whoever else might be listening, is in line with your values. What you perceive, kind of top down thinking, they're in alignment, where I believe in the concepts of what the government is putting me in these positions for. Because what'll happen there, and I'll give you a couple examples, okay, of situations that present themselves in what we call real time, where it's difficult. What happens in real time, Akash, is you have as many variables as you have, right?
Yes.
You don't have any more. That's all you got. And you make a decision based on those variables. So, for an abstract number, say there's 10 variables, but really there's 100 variables going on, and you have to make a decision on those 10, right? Okay. So a couple thoughts, and I won't use names or anything like that, but I did think about them, and I think they have some relevance. So we're in Afghanistan. We're all fresh faced, minus a few guys who had already been there. But by and large, it's our first time deploying, and we were in Zangabad, which was the spiritual birthplace of the Taliban. And, by the time we got there, it's what you call an established battlefield, but established on our side also means established on the quote unquote other side,
Yes.
Okay. So we're there, and one of the platoons is out on patrol, and a young kid on a bike comes around a corner from a compound, and he's biking towards the patrol. He doesn't stop. He doesn't listen. The soldier is within every one of his rights as far as rules of engagement, which now at this point are agreed upon by, most of the countries who were in Afghanistan, which was a lot. There was a lot of countries that were involved in Afghanistan,
Yes.
including Afghanistan. So he has these rules that, I'm within my right, and he shoots the young kid on the bike because the young kid's not stopping. Who knows? It's hard to tell. Has he got a bomb or something like that?
Yes.
Fortunately, the child doesn't die. He's evac'd and given, top-notch medical care. And but now this soldier has this in his mind. He's like, yeah, okay, within my rights, for even self-protection, I was 100% justified, but I shot this kid, and this is one of those things that takes a while, among the many other things that cause stress in the world of battle, that'll take some time to resolve. Another example, same kind of thing where someone's completely in their rights as far as rules of engagement and self-protection go. They're in a convoy, and a man at the time, called them fighting age males, but a man is approaching the convoy. He's not really heeding the, get back kind of like, it's pretty easy, right? You're in a big giant armored vehicle and you're like putting up your hand. Everybody kind of gets the gist, right?
Yes.
Now, understandably, this is an Afghan man, and we're on his soil, and he's kind of like, well, no, I'm not really doing anything wrong here. Why am I going to stop, right?
That's correct.
Keeps approaching, gets shot. He's killed. The reason he got shot is he had wires hanging out of his pocket. Now, this might sound strange, but in poor areas of the world, people tend to keep a lot of stuff in their pockets that, they could trade for, barter for, things like that, right? It just happens that at this time, EODs, or explosive devices, IEDs, I meant to say, are everywhere. And so the mindset is, oh God, this guy's got a bomb. Anyways, we went with our EOD unit or EROC unit. They were both like units for sweeping bombs. We're there, and we got the machine, and we're like, the machine's like lifting him up, and his body's kind of flopping around, and it's like, oh, and it turns out it's just like one piece of wire in his pocket. And now this guy hoisted that aboard, he's like, okay, I was in my rights and my value, but now I've just killed someone who wasn't really doing anything wrong. You know what I mean? Yes, he was crossing the line of some rules of engagement invented by another country. And here's kind of a really interesting pickle. I could go on with these because this is what I'm talking about. Real-time decisions are convoluted and they're difficult. And unfortunately, people have to wear that. So we were a light infantry unit, so we usually walked around everywhere, but there was times where we had to get in the old armored vehicles. We had Lav 3s, which had the big 25 millimeter Bushmaster cannon on it. Just a beast of a machine, like unbelievable what these weapons of war can do. Okay, so we had what we called the Tajiman. That was kind of our colloquial type, but that was the translator.
Okay.
So in this case, it was an Afghan. And he would roll around with us. And we started noticing that what he would do is the Taliban or Al-Qaeda, the whole hodgepodge of who we were fighting would use something called ICOM radios or handheld radios, but we would use an ICOM to try to track them, right? So he would be sitting there, we'd be rolling around, we're looking for signals and all that kind of stuff. We're doing our patrols and all that jazz, poking around. And we noticed that he would hold the talk button on when we were just sitting there. He's trying to do it. Like what he was doing is he was relaying back to the Taliban what we were saying, right? Indirectly. You understand what I mean? So they're listening to us, trying to find them. Now, obviously we can't be having that. That's basically, he's now a traitor to this cause. So he was within the protection of our compound, our combat outpost, and we had to send him on his way. It's very unceremonious. We didn't We're not really in a position, I believe, I won't get into laws of it all, but we're not in a position to really not execute any jurisdiction, but we don't really have any judicial cause that we can follow here. We're at a combat outpost, and it's kind of like, see you later. Anyhow, and remember, this is in a much more, I'd say, ancient part of the world. That hasn't changed too much. It's it's all mud buildings and farming, very agrarian. It's things stick out, is what I'm saying. It's not a big cityscape where you can disappear. Anyways, I can't remember if it was like a few days later or whatever. We found him hanging in a grape hut. These grape huts that they used to dry. So it turns out that the Taliban had threatened his family to make him do this. So he comes in and he does this from pressures, threats from the outside. And then we have to get rid of him now. We're not in a position to, this is Zangabad. This is, we got too much going on to be housing prisoners. We don't even have a thing to really house these prisoners. And like I said, I don't think there was anything to like judicially follow through other than let him go. So now here he is dead because the Taliban was threatening him. We couldn't keep him around. And now there's this dead man that is just 100%, not even collateral, but this casualty of this war, these atrocities of what a fear mindset of this evil can do, right? And I'm not saying the Taliban were wrong. I'm not saying we were right. I'm not saying we were wrong, and I'm not saying they were right. What I'm saying is that there was more to the story, and until human beings can truly evolve their consciousness to think not just black or white, not just the spectrum of black and white, and not just paradoxically, but the whole, every angle and facet, of every facet of it. And then we can be accepting and open to that. We're just going to keep leaving men and women in these positions where they are going to get hurt. And, when you step back, it's very unlikely that Canada was ever going to be really, really threatened by the Taliban, So that wasn't really part of our motivation. Part of the motivation was to get women and children in school, help them develop some infrastructure, maybe make them a little bit more of a global player. I don't know if they really wanted that. Like I said, in some ways, they're a much more ancient part of the world. And I think they got it right in some ways where the pace is slower, but there was atrocities. You know what I mean? Yeah. There's no doubt about that. So anyways, like all that kind of just to paint a little bit more picture of the complexities of it. And now, I don't know what service is like for you guys, but I also do have this, I wouldn't quite call it like a view that mandatory military service should be a thing, but like in Israel, it's pretty successful. People get an education, they get paid to go. They don't have to deploy necessarily, but they contribute to their society. They learn a lot. They learn skills and trades. They learn discipline, camaraderie. But they're ready in case something happens. If they choose to keep going further down the rabbit hole, they can. And what is it? Switzerland, I think, might have mandatory military service, and South Korea. There's a few places, and I think if it's done right, it can be okay. It's like an exchange, right? I give a little bit to the country. Oh man, I understand what it's like to serve the country a little bit. I get some money and some skills, and then I go into school or whatnot afterwards. There's a place for that.
But I think in India, we do not have this because our population is very huge, and a lot of people voluntarily join the armed forces. So we don't have to make it as a mandate. So we kind of have the the largest standing voluntary army in the world. So we do not actually need that.
Yeah, exactly. It's a good place to go and get employment, right? It's that's where I think it's a good move on the government's part too, to have that, like even if You're not deploying all around the world, even if you're not force projecting.
Yes.
It's still a good thing to have, like even in Canada here, instead of having so many people, it's not like it's rampant, but on social assistance or something like that, why not put them into a program that will help develop them holistically, their brain and their body get healthier. So instead of keeping them locked in, like I say, what we'll call welfare or social assistance, they're actually contributing. And that, again, I don't think that necessarily needs to entail mandatory deployments for combat zones, because I get that not everybody is cut from that cloth to go to a combat zone, and nor should they, because even ones who think they are cut from that cloth, lots of them come home with stress disorders, injuries, wounds, legs, arms, all that kind of stuff, right? So it's a big toll to pay.
Got it. So Jeff, if you could also speak about, your selection process once you enlisted in the military, how did you, transition into special forces, and what are the qualities that they're looking into before you join the tier 1, the JTF 2?
Yeah. So obviously, I can't go down the rabbit hole too much of the actual traits that are looked for. But for us, selection starts really much before you even go. You sit down with psychologists and stuff like that. And just by numerical metrics, they're able to determine the likelihood of you making it through. Okay. Some of that is based on physical stuff. Some of that is based on life experience, courses you take in education, the hardships you've endured, right? The truth is, if you really haven't endured too much hardship, it's like, the saying, you sink to the level of your training. You don't rise to the occasion necessarily. The body and the mind only have so much they can pull from, right? You just literally don't have the experience to perform at these levels. So anyways, that really starts kind of chopping the list very quickly, actually in a big way. And then compared to a lot of other countries, we have a relatively small selection in terms of size of groups and in terms of time. So ours was developed a little bit differently than a lot of the other places in the world. A lot of the places in the world follow the SAS kind of model, which is a good model. This isn't like a us versus them kind of thing. It's different. Those are they're intense, labor intent. How do they call it? Force. In order to force generate, there's a lot of force needed. And you need 6 months of guys working these long selections, or maybe not quite 6 months, but some of them, months. So you're taking away your operators to work selection. So ours, kind of the phase 3 of it is 7 days long. And it goes through the whole thing, right? It goes through all your phobias. It goes through all your character traits, physically, checks like, okay, agility. It basically wants to paint a holistic picture of you. And either you meet those checks in the box or you don't. Now, it's clever in terms of not just selecting a homogenized blend of people. You don't want to limit. As soon as you have checks in the box, you can start limiting what kind of people can get. Like, let's just pretend like there was a height limit. Let's just say 5'5" was the height limit. You're telling me that someone who's 5'4" just might not be, he might be the best operator that ever existed, right? That's a really obvious one. But once you start doing, thousands of characteristics, you can start to limit, right?
Yes.
So in that way, it's very clever, because then your pool of candidates is still a big spectrum, which is nice. You got all kinds of guys, all kinds of backgrounds, all kind of life experience, that kind of stuff. And then, so it's pretty typical in terms of like, probably 8 to 12% pass rate for that. And then we run a few serials of that. And then from there, from those serials, the guys are pooled up. And then the ice cube is shaved down to the best 30. And if there isn't 30 that make the mark to move on to the next level, which is the operator's course, that's okay. We'll run the course next year, or we'll run it with less guys if there's enough, if there's like a critical mass.
Got it.
From there, they go on to the operators course, and the operators course is it's like what they call a meat grinder. It is very, very demanding. I don't think I've been under that kind of pressure any other time in my life for that sustained amount of time. It's months and months and months and months, and it's just like sustained. And what happens though is, I don't know if they still do this, but they're always kind of chopping the bottom. So there's always this pressure, not only do you got to meet the standards, but there's always like a
elimination. Yeah.
And at the same time, it's not designed to create like, and again, I don't know if they still do that because it's been a few years, and things do change. Without creating I have to survive at all costs. So, no camaraderie kind of situation. You want to make sure that there's camaraderie, right? That you want individuals who can perform on a team.
Yes.
And then, the assaulter course, months and months of world-class training, truly world-class. It's such a great program. It was great to go through. It was an amazing experience. I won't get into the nuts and bolts of it. But, basics, shoot, move, communicate, CQB, insertion methods, that kind of stuff. Both gray, black, and green roles. And which just means in the bush, in the city, and then in plain clothes kind of stuff.
Okay.
And then from there, I don't know if this saying has made its way over to India, but there's a saying that's selection never ends, which means even once you make it into the unit, you're always there. You always have to perform. You always have to perform. Every dog has his day, but you have to perform. And that creates what we call it, the model of relentless pursuit of excellence. It's a culture that, it's not that I want to be better than you or you want to be better than me. We're doing it because we understand it makes the team, the group, the organization, quote unquote, better, and better just translates to more capable of, imposing national defense, counterterrorism, whatever the unit's mandate is. To be honest, I don't know what our unit's mandate is anymore. It's been so long, but it's in general, take care of national security, whatever the government throws at you, handle it. So you can imagine if your job was to hit a nail every day, you get pretty good at hitting nails. But if your job is everything in the toolbox plus stuff, and in an ever evolving world, it's just constant, right? That's what I meant by selection never ends, which is a good thing. But again, it's a lot of pressure as well.
Got it. So Jeff, if you could also speak about, because you told me that you were trying to get into the US Armed Forces first. So during your tenure, did you, ever did an exercise or, collaborated with the special forces of other countries? So how was your experience and how do you rate them?
To be honest, I'm not 100% sure where my arcs of what we call, like operational security, ComSec kind of stuff end and begin here. But yes, units all around the world, American, British, Australian, New Zealand, like Jordanian, Israeli. I'm not sure if I ever got to work with the Indian, some of the Scandinavian countries. What I would say is this: it doesn't matter what country someone comes from. If you look at, things as an echelon, and you have everybody in, we'll say, the Indian Army at the bottom here, right? Everybody, we'll just lump them in there. Then as you go up in rank, as you go up in speciality, as you go up into your special forces, I don't know, you mentioned all your like land, air, and sea all have their own version of special forces. Is there one that's the next level from that? Or is it like Air Force Special Forces is equal to Army is equal to Navy? How does it work in India?
So it's not like that. So within Army, we have certain battalions which are like they will be sent for special missions. Similarly, in the Indian Navy, we have some Marcos. They are the Marine Commandos, so they are also considered elite. So kind of the 4 para or the 9 para, they are considered to be elite in the Army. So we have such battalions.
Okay. So anyways, same thing though, as you move into those battalions, as you go up the echelon, naturally the quality of human being in some ways, and quality based on certain traits, this isn't like, we're not talking human rights or equal rights here, like I'm equal to you kind of stuff. We're talking about traits that make you good at being at that upper echelon of performance, start to get similar. So all that to say, it didn't really matter what selections people went through. Didn't matter really what country they came from. There was always different levels of hardship and perseverance needed, but they were all unique in their own ways, but all top notch in their own ways. Like I would never, honestly, you could never be like, oh yeah, this one's better than this one is better than this one. Because some have better programs in some ways than others, some have better breaching capabilities. Some might have better sniping capabilities. Some have better pair capabilities. But what is happening is what we call the global engagement strategy. And we started to bring that together, right? The last big wars in Iraq and Afghanistan really started to bring the world together that way, which is a good thing, I think, because we're all ambassadors from our countries. And if you work with me, then you go back to India and you say, oh yeah, the Canadians are great, right? And I go back and I say, oh yeah, the Indians are great. You know what I mean? And that's an education through experience that's trickled down through society in a way, right? So yeah, I in Iraq, in Afghanistan, I worked with a bunch of units. They're all great, and like I said, all unique, but all, top-notch dudes.
Got it.
And dudettes.
So Jeff, if you could also speak about, when you joined the special forces. So as a young operator, how was your experience in the combat for the first time? And now that you look back, what are the various learnings that you had from that experience?
First time in combat. Give me a second just to remember exactly which one. Okay. Yeah. So we just got to Afghanistan, and what we had to do was we were at the Kandahar airfield, and along the Arghandab River, there was combat outposts.
Okay.
Which our company had to go and occupy. There was 3 of them, I believe, or at least 2 for sure. Anyways, your first time going into a combat zone is kind of surreal, right? Because you're like, I've got a lot of training, but like, what is coming my way here? You really don't know. You can think you're this hardened soldier. You can think you're the best, but it doesn't matter, because the way the environment is, the way it is you got a lot of exposed parts in the green military, in the normal army. In the SF, you tend to control variables much more. Anyhow, it was kind of neat in a way, because now we're leaving pretty much. I think it was like 2 days later, we were all equipped and we were rolling out. So we started off, we were in our armored labs, and we went to another FOB, forward operating base, Massamgar. We spent a night there. Next day, we get in to the riverbed, which is dry. There's not a ton of water in the south of Afghanistan. And we're going along, and we have these machines, they're like big tiller chains that kind of chew up the ground a little. They don't really chew it up. They just beat it with chains so explosives go off. And I remember, boom, first one goes off, and then, we're going up a little bit more. And I'm in the back. I'm in a box. I feel I'd much rather be, in a position where I can fight. And the very first, they start shooting at us. Mortars start coming in. It was very whatever the recoilless rifle rounds were they had there, the 84, 82 millimeter, the ones that penetrated tanks and stuff super easily. They were hitting the ground. It was full on, we're doing this, and I remember we had these screens inside the labs, and the gunner pans over, and we're driving up, and for the first time we see these people through, it looks kind of like like night vision goggles kind of look.
Yeah.
It's like a thermal display. It's not not the night vision goggles are thermal, but it's more of like a thermal display. And there is 3 guys shooting mortars, and they start to run, and then they get mowed down. And the day kind of proceeded like this, all the way up this riverbed of, J dams coming in, and I was, our bullets flying everywhere, the mortars and stuff. And then we get into our combat outpost finally, and boom, fucking mortar comes in right through one of the sea cans. We ended up, and it kind of sounds weird, but we ended up getting everybody that was attacking us, which really actually cleaned house for a bit, because it takes them a while to recoup logistically there. It takes them a while to get trained on mortars and stuff like that. But the point of that was, we all got out unscathed, and we just had this epic 8-hour day of combat. And we were like, and in some ways it was like, oh my God, doing this every day, all day, like this is going to be crazy. There's no way you make it out, like how did people make it out of here? So fortunately, not every day was like that. But there was a lot of days like that, a lot of multi-hour fights. No one can ever take away from the Afghans that they have fight in their soul. They're warriors.
Yeah.
And I think not more interesting, but shortly after that, we got there, and then we were attacked at the combat outpost. And one of our gunners, it's a gun that's in a lot of armies, but we call it the C6. It's a 7.62 millimeter machine gun. And he's up there, and he's in the tower, and he's shooting, and he gets shot. So that was a little bit more intense now, because now it's not that it wasn't real before, but usually if a bullet whizzes by you, yeah, it's got a big snap, but you don't really see it. It's just kind of flying by you. If a bomb goes off over there, it goes off, it's a bomb, but it really doesn't impact you, But now we got someone who's shot, and we get him down from the tower. Myself and the medic are there, and it's kind of like it's his first tour as well. And we're like, I remember this like moment of like looking at him like, oh damn, like this is it here. This guy's shot, we got to deal with this. And it was much more, I would say it was more stressful. I would say my rates were elevated. Now, we've been in the pocket here for a while, and you're not sleeping as well, you're not eating as well. So all these things give you combat fatigue. And I'll never forget that moment of like the first casualty we had, because, you see where you can rise, but you also see where, oh man, like this stuff's really real. And I remember I stepped outside, and the combat outposts got these big, like kind of what they call Hessian. They're basically big sacks of sand all around. And so I'm thinking, man, the guys are doing their business, they're fighting this off. It was kind of a multi-pronged attack. And I just like went outside from the dock. We ended up dealing with this guy, and I just like take a moment, just like, okay, get my bearings. And one of our own artillery rounds went off, but it was an airburst round. And somehow I'm just sitting there, and one of the chunks comes in, and it's just like, and it sticks right beside my head, like literally right beside my head. And that happened a bunch more times. Bullets by the head. We're in a mortar pit, and a chunk of some explosive landed right beside us. Like over and over, all these close calls, but you get used to it. You accept, that you're a soldier, and that's why you're there. You accept, you accept your fate, if you will. You know what I mean? You're there to do a job. And fortunately for us, I feel that, by the time we left, and it wasn't just we as just our rotation, but by the time I was leaving, things were improving there. Many schools opened up, which is huge. I think education could use a reform in the world, but I still believe in education, and so now we have children that are in school, and women had more rights. Roadways were being developed. And not to like modernize them, because I would never want to impose that, but there's a few things in this world that I think are pretty agreed upon as healthy, you know, such as education, such as women having rights that are beyond being locked away, you know. And you know, things like their Afghani, their currency, it went up in value, which is big, so that they could buy things on the global market as well. And you know, love or hate capitalism, whatever, that's kind of the model that's really going on right now. And if you can't play that game, it's probably going to be a lot harder for you. But yeah, I'd say exhilarating. You know, it's very simple, Akash. Here's a very simple thing. One big breath in and out. That's it. No matter what you do in life, whether someone's trying to kill you, gain composure, down-regulate your nervous system, and then you're much more able to think about the situation.
Yeah, got it. I just have one more question around it. So because you've been into multiple combats, so what was your mindset, you know, before you get into a combat, during, and, you know, after it? So how did that feel, if you could describe that?
Well, there was times where remember I said that second day in kind of set the tone. Like you're not really ever, once you're there, you're not out of it. So leading up to it, what I did for myself was I did all the training, obviously, that we do. The Canadian Forces at this time, I mean, it was like a year of workup training, which is good, you know, preparing you for a lot of eventualities. Because what happens is if you're overwhelmed, scared, you're not going to make rational decisions. I won't get into like the mechanics of it, but you just won't. You know, your brain will try to cling to things like standard solutions, if you will. But if they're not there, you're not going to get them. So the idea was train these soldiers really well. I visualized a lot. I visualized my own death. I visualized like that ultimate sacrifice. I visualized killing people, and not in like a psychotic way, not trying to derive pleasure from it, but I had to be comfortable with, I mean, if you're in the infantry or in the special forces, you have to be comfortable with that concept. You don't have to like, you know, it doesn't have to be taken too far. It's just, you got to be comfortable with the concept of killing someone. So going through all that really helped me. It helped set the conditions for once it did happen, you know, like those breathing practices, things like that. So going in, you know, there's always that like, oh man, I'm going to get my leg blown off. You know, what's going to happen? Am I going to make a bad choice and I'm going to live with regret, whatnot? You know, you do that. But in a way, anyone who does anything extreme in life that appreciates extreme stuff, there's almost like it sets you free, right? Worrying about the moment is almost always more stressful than being in the moment. Almost always. Because, you know, you can fantasize your own worst enemy. You can fantasize the worst case scenario. You know, you know what sets you off in a negative way. So usually once it happened, not usually, the truth was we had a great team. We had a great platoon over there when I was in the Rig Force, and, you know, everybody acted accordingly. They did what they're supposed to do. They gave them the good news. Everyone did their job to their best of their abilities. Only a few people had the kind of like classic breaking down, you know, from the stress, because there is a lot of stress. Like there's a pressure in combat that if you don't find outlets, you know, like sense of humor becomes very important. Laughing, you know, it seems kind of like, okay, yeah, but it's super important. If you get too serious, you lock up. So for me, I feel like I always performed accordingly. I was very ready for it. I have natural traits that helped me be good at that. Like you also have to culture them, right? You have to train, you have to adapt them, you have to change who you are. But I was born with a lot of the right traits to do this. And that's something that people don't ask themselves often enough in units that deploy. You know, should I be doing this? The question of can I do this is important, but it's the question should, you know, not everybody should do that. And that's a fact, or you're just going to become a liability. Yeah, but all the guys acted accordingly. It was great in a lot of ways. We were very fortunate. Our unit, we did some big disrupts while we were there, some really massive positive inputs to help set conditions for them to settle. I guess maybe I don't really know what's going on there right now, but it sounds like it wasn't doing so great. But you know, definitely gave some, like I said, set those conditions so people can maybe move forward in life a lot more than they were. And then there was like a melancholy almost when we were leaving, because it becomes part of you, right? You leave a little bit of your soul on the battlefield, and a lot of your identity is tied to this. And especially once you start getting those longer tours, you know, over anything over 3 months, even 3 months is pretty long, but anything over that, you really start to, well, man, I've been here a while, right? So yeah, there was some sadness there. But, you know, and then the years went on, and in the SF, there was other deployments and other adventures, if you will.
Got it. So Jeff, if you could also speak about, you know, the team culture in the special forces compared to the regular infantry, how was that for you? If you could describe that.
Yeah, you cut out there, Akasha. What did you want? The team dynamic? Is that what you're asking about, or what is?
Yeah, the team dynamics.
Well, in the SF, you know, we have a saying. It's a group of individuals working as a team. The characters that get there are very, very strong, but they're able to work together pretty cohesively. In fairness, you can't really compare the two, because in the SF, we have this massive budget compared to the Army. And so what that does is it gives us access to more training, more preparing, better equipment, more equipment, everything that money can buy, right? The more money you have, you can imagine what solutions you can solve just by having money, right? So not only do you have, I don't want to say better, but people who are specifically selected to do this kind of work, as opposed to the Army, you kind of get everybody who joins up in the Army, right? Like there's, you know, through basic and soldier qualification and battle school, there is its own natural weaning out, you know, its own natural kind of selection. But then now you go through actual selections, and you get this core, this nugget of really good dudes that are logistically backed. Like you can't compare, again, the regular Army to the SF. And then there's like also these weird little byproducts that, you know, all the best of the civilian world also want to work with the tier 1 units, the SF units, right? And they want to bring their knowledge there. One, they can, you know, the infantry, stuff like that, they move a little bit slower. You know, that's the flexibility that is bred into the SF culture is key. It is one of the things that was actually a bit of an enemy of ours when I was leaving, is it has to be flexible. That's part of the trait selection. You have to be able to adapt like that, right? You have to be able to adapt. You have to be able to adapt. You have to be able to think. You have to be able to think strategically and tactically. So in that way there, just the caliber is always higher. Because of that, it just, then your exposure, and then the mission mandates change, right? How you do the missions. Once you have all these assets, you can change things. Remember I was saying about the variables in the regular Army, the real-time decisions, you have less variables. That doesn't mean that in the SF there aren't unknown variables. Of course there are. You know, you never know where someone's going to be, what they're doing really fully, right? You try to control the situation as much as you can, especially in like really mature combat theaters like Afghanistan and Iraq. There was every kind of, you know, stacks of air support of all different kinds, right? Different drones, different helicopters, different bombs, different missiles, different everything, you know, satellites, all kinds of stuff. Like you literally had almost every tool. But once you went in somewhere, even if you have satellite cover, you don't see what's inside. So there still are variables, but you control more of those. You learn to control more of them. You have more tools. You can't really compare. It's not even apples and oranges. It's like, you know, cucumbers. It's like not even like comparing fruit, right? They're just so different. You can't compare them. Lucky for me though, interestingly enough, just a kind of side note, a lot of the guys I deployed with I also went on my assaulters course with. So, I was already surrounded by good dudes, good soldiers.
So Jeff, if I can also tell us, what does leadership actually mean to you? And, how did various combat situations that you've been through help you develop those leadership skills, and how important that is in combat?
Wow, gosh, leadership, huh? That's a big topic. I don't know what angle to start at, because leadership to me is truly about, if I'm going to be in a leadership role and I'm going to help develop it around me, it's about creating leaders around me, people who can step into my position, right? I think real leaders don't stifle below. They always want, I always approached it as if, people I was training or whatnot, I want you to be better than me. I want you to be better than me. That'll help me be better, right? That's like, that makes it for the greater good. But as you said, how did combat transition or translate into leadership? I would say stress management. There's nobody in this world that is immune to the pressures of stress. That's just a fact. You can learn to cope with it a little bit better. But if you get into a complex situation like combat, for example, you might have like an acute moment, right? Where a bomb goes off really close, boom, someone's injured, you got to fix that. Like that's higher acute stress. But now you've been in a combat zone, so you've already been stressed for a while. Your food's not as good, you're not sleeping as well. A good leader monitors this stuff in themselves, because if you're not sorted out, you're not going to be able to sort out the people around you, not as well. But they also monitor that in other people. How are you doing? Communication lines are opened up. Hey, Akash, how you feeling today? Okay, well, what's got you up? What's got you down? Trying to get those needs, those wants, those basic Maslowian needs met and want, right? So like I said, it's about empowering those around you, but understanding if you are in the leadership role that, these are other human beings. They have needs and wants that go beyond just food and water, right? They want to feel like they belong. They want their confidence to be high. They want to understand who they are. And that can be difficult in the military, because in the military, you're a soldier, right? That's what the military, they're very good at making you a soldier. And that's good, because that's the job title, right? The fact is, though, is you're not just a robot. You're a human being. So those things can go by the wayside a lot, right? If a leader is not emotionally competent, they're not what they call EQ, emotional quotient, able to understand other people's emotions and their own. It's one of the traits that gets a little bit overlooked a bit, because it's, military, especially with men around, there's a lot of kind of suck it up and just carry on mentality, which is important at times. Not everything is, sometimes you have to bury the emotion, get the job done. But there's a time where you got to decompress that as well. And it's kind of interesting. It shows up in some interesting ways in the military, because it can look a little bit irreverent in some ways. I won't get into details, but it's very effective. So when you're trying to make sense of the world around you, and the world's complicated, right? If I was to go to where you live right now, I'd have to figure out, I'd have to get my bearings, right? I have to understand, okay, what's India's got a way different culture than Canada. Mannerisms, gestures, such as the one you're using right now, right? That's not a gesture that we use. But it's one that as soon as I understand it, it makes sense, right? But now you're in a combat zone and you have all these things, right, that you got to adjust and learn. And anyways, that all starts to fall under the leadership bracket to me. Just helping people get their bearings.
So Jeff, since you were a sniper, if you could, tell us what was your favorite weapon in combat? Also, any memorable incidents that you had as a sniper, which you could describe for us to whatever details you can.
Well, the truth is my sniping tenure was pretty short. And then now we're getting into the realm of the SF, where I don't get to talk about what weapons we used and stuff like that as much. You know what I mean? So my scope of being able to share is not as big. But my kind of Since I left, there's been some new weapons developed that are not just arguably better, but they are better. There's a caliber 375 enabler round that it's probably the best long range round there is in some ways. I don't know if it shoots quite as far as like a 50 cal shoulder fired weapon, but my favorite was the 338 Lapua Magnum. I really like that caliber. It's not too big, and it's big enough that it can, what we call beat the wind, cheat the wind, where the wind doesn't affect it so much. The smaller your caliber, the more it's going to be affected. Like I said, I can't really get into the nuts and bolts of that time in my life. I do apologize for that, but yeah.
Not a problem. So Jeff, if you could also tell us, what was the most, challenging experience that you had, and what was your mindset back then, and how did you overcome those situations?
So challenge is relative, meaning like I specifically said basic training earlier sucks kind of thing, because for me, it really sucked because I had this vision of what the military should be, and basic training was not that, sewing and labeling things. So that made it very challenging for me. It wasn't the most challenging, but that challenge allowed me to have, bigger and bigger challenges, right? I would say, man, it's so hard to tell because there was so many monumental, especially once you get in the SF, you're asked to do Olympic level stuff. You know what I mean? You're the weight of the titanic weight of what you're supposed to do is massive. In some ways, though, one does pop into my mind. We just like been multiple days in combat. It was very grueling, really low sleep. It was like it was 3 days, and it was like something out of a movie. You know what I mean? Like it was just like artillery, like it was like everything. The whole thing. And we're going back, and right beside our combat outpost, we had some intel that one of the, not the mullah, I can't remember the proper title. One of the tribal leaders was hiding weapons and stuff. And now we did kind of, I'm going to call it a raid, but it's not really the technical term because I'm kind of unfamiliar with the technical term. And we found all these weapons, like right here, right, literally the fence of the combat outpost, like right there, mud hut. And it'd been under our nose this whole time. Someone we've been interacting with. And you got to think, this is multiple days of almost no sleep. And then kind of this treachery, like, hey man, you're supposed to be working with us here. It was a big blow, right? Because we're working together. And then get back. And then I had a call from my wife at the time, and she had just lost her, she was pregnant. Just a little over 6 months pregnant, and she had just lost our baby. And that was a very trying moment in a different way. Combat was not super trying. You get kind of used to it. You almost get hooked on it, right? They call it, pipe hitting or chasing the dragon. It's a rush and extreme. And so you go after it. Challenge comes up from things that you don't expect when you don't expect them, right? And so that was quite the monster. In a very mental way, because now I couldn't get home. I'm super exhausted. I have almost no literal energy left. I can't get home to her. It was kind of like each one the whole time was, I don't want to call them failures, but pretty much the mission objectives were met. And then like I said, then this kind of treachery situation, and then to that, and that was a big time low. That one popped into my mind. Like as far as like physically going, there's things like selection and all that. They're titanic and undertaking. They're big. They're monsters. So that kind of challenge, but you get a little bit more used to that challenge, right? physical challenge becomes your comfort zone. You might push it to the edge, but it's your comfort zone. It's when it's something that's completely out of your comfort zone that it's like, whew, that really hits you, right? Yeah, like I say, I can't say moments of combat were all that bad for me. Those weren't the difficult times. Moments of deep sheer pushing myself to the limits they were challenging, don't get me wrong.
Yep.
And each challenge made me stronger for the next one. That's kind of the art of adversity.
Got it. So if you could also speak about, you said you went through airborne training. So how was your experience when you jumped out of an aircraft? So how did that feel like?
Yeah, so I started with basic airborne training, which is like the round parachute, kind of World War II looking thing.
Yeah, static jumps.
Yeah, static line. So that was awful. That was like just sheer, the way they do it. It's a hardening process, right? It's very laborsome. It's very intense. It's physically and psychologically draining. The shoot is super uncomfortable. The whole time it kind of sucks, right? And then you get in this Hercules aircraft and then it's screaming by and it's like, oh boy, I already done some skydiving before this in the civilian side, which wasn't so dramatic, but this was just awful in terms of discomfort. But they want that. They want you to be that's how you get more comfortable with being uncomfortable, is being uncomfortable. I know it's kind of like a weird little mix up there, but and I remember my first jump. They're like, yeah, if you want to like go left or right, you just pull what they call a slip, which is just basically going up to your risers. And I'm coming in and it's kind of springtime, but there's a creek that runs across the drop zone and it's frozen. And I'm going towards it. I'm like, oh yeah, no big deal. This is my first jump under the round chute. I pull a slip and nothing happens because they don't really do too much. It's more of an illusion. It's like you're at the mercy of the wind. Bam, I slam into the ice face first. And then I get dragged. And then my reserve chute, which is it's like the hamburger, it's on your belly, gets ripped open. It deploys. Here I am, like kind of broken through the ice now, soaking wet. Both chutes open, slammed into the ground. I was like, oh man, that like, there's like 10 seconds of like, oh, this is awesome. And then wham, because you're not in the air very long. Walk back up. And then I got jacked up because my reserve had deployed. I was like, I didn't pull this, you know what I mean? Like, anyhow, that was my first experience. So that kind of airborne stuff was, it was great. And then once I got back to the unit, I did what we call the Airborne In-Dock course, which is just a few weeks of humping and jumping and sweating and surviving and shooting and that kind of stuff. It was really great. And then once I got into the SF, I did all my free fall qualifications and stuff like that. So all the way up to oxygen levels. And then I became a jump master. And then I helped teach on some courses before I left the military. Those were much more pleasant. Parachute inserts is a big insertion method for the SF. It's one of the big ones. And that was a lot more fun, doing multi-way flying, lots of good stacks, because now you got full control of your parachute. You got all the equipment there to nav in and stuff like that. So it's pretty cool. You jump from undisclosed heights, kilometers and tens of kilometers away, or even more. And you're hitting these small little drop zones. That's pretty cool stuff. Yeah, that every now and then I think about maybe getting back into it a little bit, just on the civvy side, but I just have too much on the go to do that.
Yep. So Jeff, my final question to you would be, how did you transition from military? And also if you could speak about, the special forces experience that you built.
Okay. Yeah. This is an important one because this is where the wheels can fall off a lot for people. I don't know what it's like for you guys with your transition programs, but for me and a lot of people, you build this identity around being a soldier. You train your brain, you train your body to be a soldier, right? You act like a soldier, you do soldierly things, you deploy, whatever it is. And the military gives you support for that, right? They support you being a soldier.
Yes.
And then comes a certain point in your life where you're like, okay, this is either whatever the reason is. I met who became my wife now, the love of my life, and that was the catalyst for me to transition. But everybody's got their own reasons. Maybe it's retirement, maybe it's family issues, maybe it's not an issue, maybe they want to start an entrepreneurial endeavor. There's this undoing, almost not like a reversal, but now I need to act as a civilian.
Yep.
That it's a different, even though we fall under civilian laws and all that, it's just a different way of being. There's a lot of culture in the military that doesn't cross over to the civilian world. And then brings up the kind of like those identity questions, like, okay, well, really, who am I now? Before I was a soldier, I was given my number, I was given my missions. This is what I do, So like I said, I mentioned it's important because as people transition, they could have gone through stressful moments in the military. Most likely they will. If you're in the military and you haven't been stressed out at all, then the military that you're serving is not doing their job, right? Because it's supposed to be stressful too, right? Anyways, yeah, recreating that new story, that new narrative of who you are, not only involves like a transition plan. Okay, this is how I'm going to do it literally, but it also should involve how you're going to make sure you stay healthy and take care of yourself, and how you transition into this next stage of your life. For me, that segue was into the Special Forces experience, which I didn't want to be a government contractor, and I didn't want to do any more military style stuff. Really, I still like shooting and all that, but I wanted to transition into this new version of me. The issue was I'd spent so much time in the military that it's like, okay, how do I transition these skills? That's where it gets difficult, right? Is overlapping the skills with who you want to be. Because at 35, it's, going back to school, I could do it, but it's not really what I want to do. It's like, okay, I could go get certificates. I could do a lot of things, but how do I transition this stuff? And we found the perfect way with the Special Forces experience, mainly the process. That's the kind of flagship program of using stress to enhance, change, or modify your behavior. So that's what the military already does. They already do that.
Yes.
It's a very delicate procedure because I should never dictate to you what you should do, really, right? That's not what a master does. That's not what someone who really understands the human experience does. You set up boundaries and guidance and you talk about it, but I should never be like, hey, this is just what's best for you, and that's it, right? People try that and it's not working out right now because you are different than me. So what we do is we try to find where your psyche aligns with this through hardship. So we use something called post-traumatic growth, which is the opposite side of the PTSD coin. Which is an evolution of your expansion, or an expansion of your consciousness. Sorry. And it has military feel to it, very much so. And then what we do is we test your attributes, kind of like the military does, but all for your own personal growth. We have no agenda with it. We don't have any standards other than safety. Because again, the idea is for your own personal growth journey. And then, it's designed to catalyze these moments of insight within you where you're like, oh, okay, to cultivate your deeper values and figure out other things, non-coping mechanisms, stuff like that. It's very dynamic. It's been a wonderful experience, to tell you the truth. Guys go through, it's basically 4 phases. They're selected, then they go through training and workups, then they go through a 8-day ordeal, and then they do decompression on the other side.
Got it. So if you could also speak about, the pushing of the limits. So how do you do that? And, how does that gradually get developed in a particular human?
Yeah. So this is where there's people out there trying to do this right now. You're starting to see it around the world a little bit more. And this is where I caution people who think, caution for them to do it to themselves, and then also caution, especially if they're doing it to other people. So on the cellular level, we can handle certain loads of stress, and everybody's different.
Yes.
Like take your bones, for example. Your bones will bend a certain degree before they'll break. Mine will bend a certain degree before they break. But if we strengthen them, if we harden them, that'll change a little bit, right? Same with your muscles. That's what exercise does. It starts to develop your muscles to a certain extent of where you want. That's kind of the key, right? Is where is a realistic place for you to be? Because not everyone's got to be a power lifter, not everyone's got to be a sprinter.
Yes.
But to do life to its fullest, where does that end up, right? But it's the same thing with your neuroplasticity, the neurons in your brain, your psychology. Most of what's known about the brain is more like a statistical model. It's not highly accurate. Like if I was like to point here and say, yeah, this does this, yeah, but it's not quite that cut and dry, right? However, there are portions that do certain things, and if you exercise those properly, that also helps you with being in the uncomfortable. Okay. I think the secret to the unknown, being completely out of your comfort zone, is this kind of concept. Well, you guys have a great saying for it, a brim full of asha, hope, where when all the chips are down, you're tired, you're gutted, you're beat to the ground. There's something that keeps you hopeful for why you would carry on, and what happens is, as you navigate life, there's ups and downs, right? Sometimes you're on the up, sometimes you're on the down. And if you expand those downs, you have more ability to be on the ups. I put fear and love on the opposing forces there. So the more you step into that uncomfort zone, the more you can actually bring love into the world, because you're able to emotionally regulate. Now, of course, just like part of our program, the process, you have to develop these traits. You go into stress, and then you after action it, you decompress, you think about it, you integrate or disintegrate, resolve or dissolve your experience, right? You make sense of it. And there's a lot of physiological stuff you got to do too, right? Making sure you're sleeping super important to this kind of stuff. But I will say this, persistence without insight is pointless. So just going to go and never learning anything is also pointless. You know what I mean? You're just now you're just an automaton robot. Everything should bring you insight. Oh, okay. Oh yeah. You should be learning, right? That's the whole point of what persistence is.
Got it, Jeff. So, Joseph, it was really interesting speaking to you, and feel enlightened, and hope a lot of my audience will get an experience of, how the Canadian Special Forces operate, and, what is their life looks like. So thanks a lot for taking out time and sharing your experience with all of us.
Yeah, no problem, Akash. It was a pleasure.